Hi, this is Paul Solt from iPhone Dev TV, and I want to show you how to create your first iPhone app. Now, this is going to be a little bit fast-paced, but I want to give you an idea of what the process is for making your first app, so you can try and follow along in Xcode. You might have to watch this video a couple times to sort of figure it out, and just try and type everything that I type. In the later videos, I'll go into more detail about what I'm doing here, but I just want to give you sort of a heads up on what this process looks like and how we sort of connect things together. So the motivation for the app that we're going to create right now is my fascination, I guess, with coffee. I like artisan brewing, and I measure out how much coffee I'm going to use in grams, as well as the amount of water in milliliters or grams. And then I use the Chemex, which you can see in the middle, and the coffee's on the right. So it's a little bit of an involved process, but I do it pretty much every day because it tastes way better than anything else. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a simple app that's going to help me calculate how much coffee I need to make and the different sort of proportions I need of everything. So when I'm entertaining family or friends, I need more coffee than what I make when I'm just making it for myself. And so I don't know exactly how much coffee I need to measure out. Unless I use a calculation and I divide the amount of water by my ratio, which is about 17 milliliters of water to 1 gram of coffee. So when I do this, I can figure out how much coffee I need, and then I can go ahead and I can make it. And that's the point of this app. So what I want you to do is follow along and do something similar. And if you've got an app idea, this is sort of a great place to sort of start to learn how to do app development. Pick something that's simple, that's got some inputs, like the numbers you see here. It's got some kind of calculation, and then it's got some kind of output. And that's really a good place to start. So we're going to jump over to Xcode. All right, so this is Xcode, and it's already open. If you want to find it, just look on the dock, and if you don't have it there, just go up top and look for Xcode. So once you've opened Xcode, you can click on it. It'll appear in the dock, and to keep it in the dock, I'm going to right click on it and then go to options, keep in dock. So if you just follow that, just a right click here, you can make this so it's always in your dock so you can always find it quickly. Once we're in here, we're going to create a new project. You can do that right here with this button, or up top, you can go to file, new project. And so we're going to do this anytime we need to create a new iPhone app or to try something out. This is how we create multiple iPhone apps and things like that. So I'll hit create new project, and I'm going to resize it so it fits my window. If you're on a small screen like a MacBook Air, it's probably going to be a little bit big, so you want to make sure it's taking the full screen size. Next, we're going to select underneath iOS, application, single view application. From here, we'll hit next, and we'll give it a name. So we'll call this the coffee app. After we name that, put your name in the organization name. And then for the company identifier, this is a reverse website. So just think that you own your own website and put it in reverse. So paulsolt.com would be com.paulsolt. And this just needs to be a unique value that you can identify with. It will be associated with your account if you have a registered $99 Apple account, but you don't need that to get started. So just put whatever you want here. It really doesn't matter as long as you have something. Next, we'll choose iPhone, and then we'll hit next. Now it's going to ask us to save it. I like to save everything on my desktop in a folder called projects. So if you don't have a folder, you can come down here and create a new folder and then create it on your desktop, and you can rename it. Since I already have one, I'm just going to double click on it, and I'm going to hit create. Now, as you can see, I have a lot of projects, so don't be afraid to create multiple projects. You don't need to do everything in one. All right, so now that we have our first Xcode project created, what we see in the center are a bunch of settings. This is where your app icons are set and things like that. And the new thing in Xcode is we don't actually see the pictures of the icons here. We actually have to go to our images.xc assets. And in here, you can see your app icon. And there right now, there's nothing there. And so we can drag images in from Finder to set these values. So right now it's kind of blank. If we hit the run button, we'll see that the iPhone pops up. And we have a blank canvas to work with. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be filling out this canvas. We'll be drawing the stuff that you saw on the screenshot in the presentation. So to show you what that looks like, this is the app that we want to be making. We have a bunch of labels. There's a label across the top that says coffee, and then we have labels that say water in milliliters, ratio, and coffee in grams. So we're going to create those labels along with the text fields that are next to them. Those text fields are places where the user can tap their finger and type a number, or they're places where we can display a result. So after the user presses the calculate button across the bottom, that's the blue line of text, then we can figure out what 950 divided by 17 is. So let's go back to the app. Now I want to show you some other things. So on the left side, we see this tab, and this tab is controlled with this button, and this right tab is controlled with this button. We also have a tab across the bottom, which is controlled with this button. So these are some ways to interact with Xcode. And what we're going to be concerned with right now is the main.storyboard. This is where we can create our interfaces, and this is where we can drag on buttons. Now, once we have the storyboard file open in the middle, we're going to look at the sidebar that we were just playing with. So this little sidebar on the right is where we can get our user interface elements. And there are a bunch of different tabs here. The one we want is this cube. And if we accidentally see the interface like this, all we have to do is drag this up. So sometimes this can be hidden. You can accidentally hide it without knowing. And this is how you can find it. So we need some labels. There's going to be a label across the top, labels on the sides, and we're just gonna click with the left mouse button, drag out and let go, and they'll just sort of add themselves to the screen. And you can see that there's grid marks. Right now it doesn't really matter how I lay it out. We're gonna fix it in a second. Now I'm gonna go ahead and rename our label on the top, calling it coffee. And I want this to be bigger text. So I'm going to come over to our text on the side. If you don't have the sidebar open still, just make it pop out and click on this T. Once you have that, I want to select System Bold. And I'm going to change the font size to something like 40, maybe 45, something like that. Now, as you can see, it didn't really update correctly, and I can drag this, and it's kind of weird. And this will happen anytime you resize the font. A fix for this is to select it and then go to size to fit content. Now I've noticed sometimes there's a bug where when you do click on it, it doesn't actually work. So just re-click on it, move it around, and click on size to fit content, or you can do the Command equals hotkey. That will make it so that it's properly fitted and it won't get clipped and you won't see the ellipses. Next, I'm going to drag our text fields up and sort of position them, and then I'm going to drag my label. And you can see I'm sort of aligning things to this grid. And so the water is going to be in milliliters, so we want the user to know what that is. And here, I just need to make sure that I have good spacing, and I'm going to look for those blue dashed lines to sort of align everything. So as you can see, I'm sort of just dragging stuff, and I'll place it when it's maybe in the center here. And then I'm going to align my text fields because those have a certain amount of spacing that Apple wants you to sort of snap your interface to. So I'm going to just drag that out. And then we're going to type in our other things. So we need water, we need the ratio, which you can alter if you want stronger or weaker coffee. And then we need the coffee label. So I'm just going to double click on this and type coffee, and that should be in grams. So I want to edit that. So these are pretty good. Now I'm just going to align that to the center, and then I want to align this one to the center, and you can see how those dashed lines. So just drag this stuff around until it gets to a position you want. We're going to double click and rename the button. And then I'm just going to position that right underneath the text fields. The lower portion of the screen, we generally don't want to put some things because when the keyboard pops up, when the users are interacting with our text fields, it can mask that. And so that's a potential issue where you can't interact with things. Okay, so now we have an interface. If I go ahead and hit the stop button in the top left and then the play button, this will start the application and we can see coffee, water, ratio, and calculate. And we can press the calculate button. We see that it responds. And then we have the different areas where we can type stuff. Right now it's set up to do the keyboard, which we don't want. We actually want to use numbers here. So if I switch over to the number pad, we can type in some numbers. And you have to see that I have to switch. And there's a fix so that this one doesn't appear by default. So I'm going to show you how that works. We're going to lower this. And I'm going to click on all of these. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking on one. I'm holding the shift key and I'm clicking on the next one. Once I do that, I can change attributes for all of these. So the thing that I want to change is this default keyboard, and I want to make it the numbers and punctuation. So now when we stop and run, we will have numbers appear by default. And if I want to get A, B, C, I can get to that. But it makes sense to have numbers here because the user is going to want to type numbers when they first come to the application. So nothing's happening right now, and this is where we're going to connect all of this to our code, which are these .h and .m files. So the ones that are important that we're going to be working with a lot are the viewcontroller.h and the viewcontroller.m. You can think of this as sort of blueprints. The .h file is like a blueprint for what your computer sort of object's going to look like. And then the .m is the actual implementation. So this is the building that we're going to create. And this includes all of the details to do all of the work in your application. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the main storyboard, and there's a special view called the Assistant Editor. If I click on this, this will show me two views. I have our interface, which is sort of hard to see right now, and I have the code that's related to it. So let's go ahead and hide our panels on the sides just by clicking on them. And now we can see our interface in the center. You can zoom out to sort of see the whole thing. And you can zoom back in. You generally, I believe, have to be zoomed in to interact with it. So now that we have it up, what we're going to do is we're going to create some connections between the interface on the left and the code on the right. I like to make these connections in our .h file, so I'm going to switch over. If you just click on the breadcrumbs along the top, you can switch over. And the Assistant Editor has both a manual mode and an automatic mode. The automatic mode will link up to the code that is related to the interface. And in this case, this view controller, this code file, is connected to our interface file on the left. And we can create connections between the interface and the code so that in code we can make modifications and we can do calculations with the input that the user gives us. So I'm just going to drag over, and what I'm doing is I'm right-clicking and dragging, and then I'm letting go. And here I'll just type a name. So this is the water text field. Now what I'm doing here is I'm typing in camel case, and camel case is where you start with a lowercase first letter, and then every word afterwards is going to be uppercase. The other thing that I'm doing here is I'm making a descriptive name. So I have water, since that's what it's related to, and then text field. That's this type of object. And I do this so that I can quickly understand what I'm talking about. This is more for you as a reader to understand what the variable is. And so this is going to create a variable. We'll talk more about variables in the next video. But this gives us a hook that we can use to modify this value. And we're going to repeat the same process. If you're working on a touchpad, you can hold down 2 fingers and then use your thumb. That will do the right click, and then I'm using my thumb to move the mouse pointer around, and then I let go. And we're doing the same exact thing except with a different sort of mouse input device. And then I type ratio text field and hit connect. So now we have the ratio text field, and the last one we need for the text fields is this coffee one. The alternative is there's one more way to do the same exact thing. Instead of a right click and drag, what we can do is we can hold the control key and then drag with our left mouse button. So we let go and we get the same result. So there's multiple ways to do it. If you're on a laptop without an external mouse, you're going to have to do it with the trackpad, where you can do the 2-button press, or you can hold the control key to get the same effect. So this is coffee and it's a text field. All right, so we've connected our properties here. And the last thing that we need to connect is we need to make this do something. And so we call those actions in code. And I'm going to right click and then drag, and this is going to allow us to pick an action. So the connection type, before we were using just outlets, that allows us to modify the value. So we can change the water in milliliters text field to contain 25 or 45 or something like that. When we change it to an action, that's going to call a method. That's going to do something in our application. That's where we can process information and then update the display. So I'm going to call this calculate button pressed. Again, I'm trying to be descriptive here. And when we're talking about actions, we like to use verbs. Verbs show us that something's happening. And so when you're looking at someone else's code, you can read the variables, which are generally nouns, and then you can read the methods or the actions, which are going to be some kind of verb. And they're going to contain a verb in the title. So we're going to hit connect. And now we have all of this different code. So now the code is connected to our interface, which means we can start doing work with the code to modify our interface. I'm going to switch back to the single view, and we're going to jump back into the navigator on the left into our view controller class. Another way to get back is to just use these breadcrumbs to switch between the interfaces. So now you can see along the bottom, we have this new method that was added. And this was added when we made that connection. So in this method, we can actually print out stuff. If you type in nslog and then an open parentheses, at symbol, a quotation mark, that's a double quotation mark, and you say calculate pressed, end quotation mark, end parentheses, semicolon. If we write all this code and we hit the stop and then the play button, in the top left, we will see that when we press calculate, a new window appears in the background and it says calculate pressed with a timestamp. If I switch back to that, as I press it, we see that the timestamp changes. So pressing this button is causing this output. That's what we mean when we have an action connected to a button. This allows us to now do work. The next step is connecting all of this together and actually doing something. So what we'll want to do is we'll want to get the input from the user and do something with it. So to start off, I'm going to create some variables and store a value in them. So I just want you to sort of follow along and type what I type. So I'm typing float water equals sign and then open square brace, and then I'm going to do self.water text field space text. This is going to get the text from that little window where the user can type. And then I'm going to ask for the float value and then end square bracket semicolon. I'm going to do something similar for the ratio. So float ratio equals sign, open square brace, self dot ratio text field, text, end square brace, float value, end square brace, semicolon. So this is going to get two values. And to show you how this works, we can print them out like this. So I'm using nslog. Again, this is how we can print stuff to this console along the bottom. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say nslog, and that's a capital N, S, and L, and then lowercase og, followed by a parentheses, at symbol, double quotation mark. there's two special characters we have in here. We have a %f and another %f. Now, these will match. These are tokens that will match a variable over here, and we have to separate everything with a comma at the end. So make sure you type this out. You'll have water, comma, ratio. The value of water is going to replace this value, and the value of ratio will replace this value. So if we go ahead and stop and then run, and we type in maybe 24 and 17, you can use the keyboard or you can type here. The keyboard's faster if you're on your computer. Then we hit calculate, we'll see that we now have the value 24.00000 and 17 with a lot of zeros. So now we have that data from the user. We have that data from the user, and we have it as a floating point number. This means that it is a value that we can do calculations with. So now we can do float coffee is equal to water divided by ratio. So we use the / to do a division, and this will create a new variable with the coffee, and we can output this. Just follow along, type that in. If we stop and run it again, I'll type in some values here and 17 and hit calculate. And we see we get a calculation result. Now we want that to be up here because the user's never going to see the console window. This is only when you're connected to your computer when you're writing the code in Xcode. So to do that, we need to display it. And what I'm going to do is create a NS string with an asterisk. And I'm going to call this coffee text. Set that to an NS string. So it's an open square bracket NS string that's a capital NSS with lowercase tring. And in here, we'll say string with format. As you're typing, you'll see all these pop-ups. If you hit tab, it will autocomplete and choose the one that you're currently selected on. So I have different options here. I want the string with format. So I can press tab or enter, and that will select it. And here I want to turn the number into a string, which is basically turning the number into text that can be output in the user interface. And I want the coffee that's a float because that's a number, it's a numeral that we want to convert to text output. And the reason we have to do these conversions is because we can't do math calculations on plain text. We actually have to convert it into a special type of variable that we can do a calculation with, and that's why we were working with the float variables. So it's okay if you don't really understand what's going on. As long as you're typing this in, you will see a result. And then we need to set this in the coffee text field. So we say self.coffeetextfield.text. This is the display for the text field. If you click more, it will show you documentation where you can read all about it. I'm going to go ahead and close that and set it to our coffee text. All right, and now if we go and stop the application, hit the run button in the top left, click in the app, type in 950, our ratio is going to be 17, and we hit the calculate button, we see our result. So this is how we can create our first iPhone application to output some values and get user input. So that's your first iPhone app, and you can play around with it. If you are looking at the iPhone simulator, you can switch in and out of the different applications that are open just by pressing the buttons. There's also hotkeys for the home button and for rotating the device and things like that.